The dust cloud rose behind the wagon as Grace Zimmerman urged her exhausted mare forward through the punishing Nevada heat, knowing that if she did not make it to the Silver Dollar Saloon by noon, she would lose her third job in as many weeks. Her calloused hands gripped the reins with desperate determination, while her mind calculated the mounting debts that threatened to swallow her small farm whole. It was August 1885, and the unforgiving sun beat down on Tonopah Junction like a hammer striking an anvil. But Grace had long since stopped noticing such trivial discomforts when survival itself hung in the balance. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead for 8 months now, killed in a mining accident that left her with nothing but 200 acres of stubborn Nevada soil, a mortgage she could barely comprehend, and memories that still woke her in the middle of the night. Grace was 24 years old, though the worry lines creasing her forehead made her look older in certain lights. She had married Thomas when she was 19, full of dreams about building a life together on their own piece of land. Those dreams had died with him in that collapsed mine shaft. The farm was all she had left of those hopeful years, and she would be damned if she let the bank take it from her. So she worked. She worked herself to the bone and beyond, taking every job she could find in Tonopah Junction and the surrounding area. 3 days a week she cleaned rooms at the boarding house run by Mrs. Henderson, a stern woman who paid fair wages but expected spotless results. 4 mornings a week she helped at the general store, stocking shelves and managing inventory for Mr. Peterson, whose arthritis made it difficult for him to handle the heavier goods. And now, if she could just make it on time, she would start serving drinks and meals at the Silver Dollar Saloon 3 nights a week. The money from all 3 jobs combined would be just enough to make her mortgage payments and keep food on her table. There would be nothing left over for repairs, for seed, for the 100 other things a working farm required. But it would keep the land hers, and that was all that mattered. Grace had grown up in a Philadelphia orphanage, never knowing her parents, never having anything that truly belonged to her until Thomas put that ring on her finger and showed her the deed to their farm. She would die before she gave it up. The mare stumbled slightly, and Grace felt a stab of guilt. The animal was as exhausted as she was, worked too hard and fed too little. But there was no choice. There was never any choice anymore. She made it to the Silver Dollar with 10 minutes to spare, tying her horse to the hitching post and smoothing down her dress as best she could. The fabric was faded and patched in several places, but it was clean. Grace always made sure she was clean, no matter how tired she was. It was a matter of pride, one of the few luxuries she allowed herself. The saloon owner, a portly man named Jack Brennan, looked her up and down with calculating eyes. "You are the widow woman who needs work, Grace Zimmerman, sir. I am a hard worker and I do not complain. I need this position." Brennan nodded slowly. "Hours are 7 to midnight, Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday. You serve drinks, you serve food, you keep your hands to yourself, and you do not steal. If any of the men get too familiar, you tell me and I handle it. I run a decent establishment here. Wages are 50 cents a night plus whatever tips you can earn. You break any glasses or plates, it comes out of your pay." Grace did the math quickly in her head. If she could avoid breaking anything, that would give her an extra $1.50 a week, plus tips if she was lucky. It might be enough to buy some winter feed for the animals. "When do I start?" "Right now. Betty is supposed to be working, but her youngest is sick. You can start tonight, and if you do well, the job is yours permanent." Grace nodded and removed her shawl, folding it carefully and placing it behind the bar. Brennan showed her where everything was kept, explained the prices, and introduced her to the cook, a Chinese man named Liu who barely looked up from his stove. Then the doors opened and the evening crowd began to filter in. The work was exhausting but straightforward. Grace carried trays loaded with whiskey glasses and beer mugs, delivered plates of stew and bread, wiped down tables, and collected empty dishes. Her feet ached within the first hour, but she smiled politely at every customer and moved with efficient grace between the tables. She had learned long ago how to make herself invisible when necessary, how to deflect unwanted attention without causing offense, how to survive in spaces that were not always welcoming to women. Most of the men were miners or ranch hands, weary from their own long days and interested mainly in their drinks and card games. A few tried to flirt with her, but Grace responded with such professional courtesy that they quickly gave up and returned their attention to their companions. She was aware of being watched, though, felt eyes following her movements. It made her uneasy, but she pushed the feeling aside. She needed this job too badly to worry about vague discomfort. Around 9 o'clock, a new group entered the saloon. Grace noticed them immediately because conversation seemed to pause momentarily as they walked in. There were 4 of them, clearly ranch hands based on their clothing and bearing. 3 of them headed directly to the bar, but the 4th man stopped near the door, his eyes scanning the room with a careful attention that spoke of long habit. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days working with horses and cattle. His hair was dark brown, almost black in the lamplight, and touched the collar of his shirt. He wore typical ranch clothing, well worn but clean, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. But it was his face that caught Grace's attention. He had strong features, a straight nose, high cheekbones, and a firm jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes were a striking pale blue, almost gray, and they were the most alert, intelligent eyes Grace had seen in a long time. Those eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then one of his companions called out to him, and the spell broke. He moved to join his friends at the bar, and Grace returned to her work, trying to ignore the way her heart had inexplicably sped up. She did not have time to think about mysterious cowboys with striking eyes. She had tables to serve, orders to take, spills to clean up. The saloon grew more crowded as the evening progressed, and Grace moved constantly, her arms aching from the weight of the trays, her back protesting every bend and reach. But she smiled and worked and counted the coins accumulating in her apron pocket. It was nearly 11 when one of the miners, clearly drunk, grabbed her wrist as she passed his table. "Come sit with us, pretty lady. You have been working too hard." Grace tried to pull her hand free, keeping her voice calm and polite. "I am afraid I cannot, sir. I have work to do." His grip tightened. "Just for a minute. We will make it worth your while." His companions laughed, and Grace felt her pulse quicken with alarm. "Let go of me, please." She kept her tone firm but not hostile, aware that escalating the situation could cost her the job. "Now, that is not very friendly." The miner yanked her closer and Grace stumbled, nearly dropping her tray. She opened her mouth to call for Brennan, but before she could speak, a tall figure appeared beside the table. "The lady asked you to let go." The voice was deep and calm, but it carried an unmistakable edge of authority. It was the blue-eyed cowboy from earlier. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his posture relaxed, but Grace could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his stance. The drunk miner looked up at him, squinting. "This is none of your business, friend. I am making it my business." The cowboy's voice had not risen, but somehow it seemed to fill the space around them. "Let go of the lady's hand. Now." The miner hesitated, looking at his companions for support, but they had gone quiet, suddenly very interested in their drinks. After a long moment, he released Grace's wrist. Was not meaning any harm, just being friendly. The cowboy nodded once, his eyes never leaving the miner's face. Then be friendly somewhere else. Grace stepped back, rubbing her wrist, and the cowboy turned to look at her. Are you all right, madam? Yes, thank you. She was surprised by how breathless she sounded. I appreciate your help. It was nothing. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and somehow elegant. You should probably tell the owner about that fellow. I will. But even as she said it, Grace knew she probably would not. If Brennan thought she was causing trouble with the customers, he might decide she was more problem than she was worth. The cowboy seemed to read something in her expression because his eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not press the issue. The rest of the evening passed without incident. The drunk miner and his friends left shortly after the confrontation, and the blue-eyed cowboy returned to his companions at the bar. Grace caught him watching her several more times, but whenever their eyes met, he simply nodded politely and looked away. It was not threatening or presumptuous. It felt almost protective, and Grace did not know quite what to make of that. When midnight finally came and the saloon began to empty, Grace's entire body ached with exhaustion. She helped Liu clean up the kitchen, then collected her wages from Brennan, who seemed satisfied with her work. The tips added another 30 cents to her earnings, and Grace carefully tucked all the coins into her purse. Every penny counted. She retrieved her shawl and stepped out into the cool night air, breathing deeply. The temperature had dropped significantly, and after the heat of the day and the close atmosphere of the saloon, the chill was welcome. Her mare waited patiently at the hitching post, and Grace walked over to untie her, mentally calculating how many hours of sleep she might manage before she had to be at the boarding house at dawn. Excuse me, madam. Grace turned quickly, her hand going instinctively to the small knife she kept hidden in her skirt pocket. The blue-eyed cowboy stood a few feet away, his hands visible and empty, his posture non-threatening. I am sorry. I did not mean to startle you. His voice was gentle, respectful. I just wanted to make sure you got to your horse safely. It is late. Grace relaxed slightly, letting her hand fall away from the concealed knife. That is kind of you, but unnecessary. I can take care of myself. I do not doubt that. He stepped a little closer, and in the moonlight she could see his features more clearly. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably around 27 or 28. But it does not hurt to have someone watch your back, especially at midnight in a town like this. You do not even know me. No, madam, I do not. But I know you have been working yourself half to death all evening, and I know that fellow inside was bothering you, and I figure the least I can do is make sure you get home safe. My mother would take a switch to me if she thought I let a lady ride out alone at this hour without at least offering to see her safe. There was something utterly genuine in his tone that made Grace's defensive walls lower just a fraction. Your mother sounds like a formidable woman. She was. A shadow passed across his face. She passed 3 years back, but she raised me right, and I try to honor that. I am sorry for your loss. Grace meant it. She knew what it was like to lose people. Thank you. He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to shake off the melancholy. I am Zachary Quinn. Most folks call me Zach. I work at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Grace Zimmerman. I have a small farm west of here. It is a pleasure to meet you properly, Mrs. Zimmerman. He touched his hat again. Would you allow me to ride along with you, at least until you are clear of town? I would feel better knowing you got home safe. Grace should have said no. She did not know this man, and accepting his company could be seen as improper. But there was something about Zachary Quinn that made her feel safe rather than threatened, and she was too tired to maintain her guard at full strength. All right. Thank you. He nodded and walked over to where his own horse was tied, a handsome bay gelding with intelligent eyes. He swung into the saddle with easy grace, and Grace mounted her own tired mare. They rode in silence through the mostly empty streets of Tanapa Junction, the sound of their horses' hooves echoing off the wooden buildings. "How long have you been working at the Silver Dollar?" Zach asked as they left the edge of town behind. "Tonight was my first night. If I did well enough, it will become a regular position." 3 nights a week? Yes. Grace hesitated, then decided there was no harm in being honest. "I also work at the boarding house and the general store. I need the income." She saw him glance at her, his expression thoughtful. "That is a lot of work. Your husband must be away often." "My husband is dead." Grace kept her voice flat, factual. After 8 months, she could say the words without breaking down, though they still hurt. "He died in a mining accident last December." "I am very sorry." Zach's voice was soft, sincere. "That must be incredibly hard." "It is, but I am managing." They rode a little further before Zach spoke again. "Working 3 jobs and running a farm by yourself, that is more than managing." "That is extraordinary." Grace felt unexpected tears prick her eyes and blinked them away angrily. She was too tired for kindness. Criticism and hardship she could handle, but genuine compassion threatened to crack the armor she had built around herself. "I do what I must. The farm is mine and I will not lose it. I understand that. Land means something. It is worth fighting for. You sound like you speak from experience." "My family lost our ranch in Texas when I was 16. Bank foreclosed during a drought year. My parents tried everything to hold on to it, but sometimes trying is not enough. We moved around after that, never settling anywhere. My father died within a year. I think losing the ranch broke something in him. My mother tried to hold us together, but she was never the same either. By the time she passed, I had been on my own for a while, working different ranches, saving money. Someday I want to buy my own place again, have something that is mine. I hope you achieve that." Grace found herself meaning it. There was something about Zachary Quinn that invited confidences, that made her want to trust him despite her better judgment. They reached the turnoff to her farm, and Grace pulled her mare to a stop. "This is where I head west. Thank you for riding with me, Mr. Quinn. It was kind of you." "Zach, please. And it was my pleasure, Mrs. Zimmerman. Will you be at the saloon on Friday, if Mr. Brennan wants me back?" "Yes." "Then perhaps I will see you there." He touched his hat one final time. "You be safe now. You too." Grace watched as he turned his horse and rode back toward the north road, then urged her own mare forward into the darkness. The ride to her farm took another 40 minutes, and by the time she reached the small house she shared with only her own loneliness, she was swaying with exhaustion. She tended to her mare first, making sure the animal had water and a small portion of hay, then stumbled into the house and collapsed onto her bed without even removing her dress. Sleep claimed her immediately, black and dreamless and far too short. The rooster woke her before dawn, and Grace dragged herself upright, every muscle in her body protesting. She had maybe 4 hours of sleep, and already the sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. She washed her face in cold water from the basin, changed into her work dress for the boarding house, and forced herself to eat a small breakfast of bread and cheese. The farm animals needed tending, so she spent 30 minutes feeding the chickens, milking her one remaining cow, and checking on the 2 aging pigs that represented her entire livestock operation. The farm looked shabby in the early morning light, and Grace felt the familiar weight of despair pressing down on her shoulders. The fields were mostly fallow because she had no money for seed and no time to work the land properly. The barn needed repairs she could not afford. The house itself was sound enough, but Thomas had been in the middle of adding a second room when he died, and the half-finished addition stood as a constant reminder of interrupted dreams. But it was hers. Every acre, every failing fence post, every weed-choked field. Hers. Grace locked the house, climbed back onto her patient mare, and rode into town for her morning shift at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson worked her hard, as always, but Grace was used to the demanding pace. She cleaned 6 rooms, changed linens, scrubbed floors, emptied chamber pots, and beat dust from carpets until her arms shook. Mrs. Henderson paid her 75 cents for the morning's work and told her she would be needed again on Friday. From the boarding house, Grace went directly to the general store, where Mr. Peterson had her hauling heavy crates of canned goods and sacks of flour. Her back screamed in protest, but she smiled and worked and said nothing. Mr. Peterson was a decent man who paid fairly, and she could not afford to complain. At the end of her shift, he handed her 60 cents and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What is this?" Grace asked, confused. "Some dried beef and a bit of sugar. You are looking too thin, Mrs. Zimmerman. You need to eat more." Grace wanted to protest, wanted to say she could not accept charity, but the truth was she needed the food desperately. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. That is very kind." The old man waved her gratitude away. "You are a good worker. I look out for my people. You take care of yourself now." Grace rode home with the unexpected gift, feeling the sting of tears again. Small kindnesses were somehow harder to bear than hardship. They reminded her that the world was not entirely cruel, which made her own situation feel even more unfair by contrast. She spent what remained of the afternoon trying to accomplish some small tasks around the farm. She repaired a section of fence that had come loose, pulled weeds from what had once been a vegetable garden, and attempted to patch a leak in the barn roof with materials she had scavenged from the unfinished addition. Every task revealed 3 more that needed doing, and Grace felt overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of it all. How could one person keep all of this running? How had she ever thought she could manage alone? But there was no alternative. She would work herself into the grave if necessary, but she would not give up. Thursday and Friday passed in similar exhausting patterns. Work at the boarding house, work at the general store, frantic attempts to keep the farm from falling apart completely, a few hours of sleep, then back to town again. By Friday evening, when it was time to return to the Silver Dollar Saloon, Grace was operating on pure stubbornness and nothing else. Brennan seemed pleased to see her, which meant she still had the job. Grace tied on her apron and got to work, falling into the rhythm she had learned on Tuesday. The saloon was busier on Friday, the weekend energy making the crowd louder and more boisterous. Grace moved through the chaos with mechanical efficiency, taking orders, delivering drinks, dodging wandering hands with practiced ease. She had been working for about 2 hours when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Evening, Mrs. Zimmerman." Grace turned to find Zachary Quinn standing there, his hat in his hands, a slight smile on his face. Despite her exhaustion, she felt her heart lift a little at the sight of him. "Good evening, Mr. Quinn. I mean Zach." His smile widened. "So Brennan kept you on. I am glad. You are a good worker. You were here for one evening. How would you know if I am a good worker? I pay attention." He glanced around the crowded saloon. "Are you managing all right? You look tired." "I am always tired," Grace said without thinking, then immediately regretted her honesty. "I apologize. That was not appropriate." It was honest, which I appreciate more than appropriate. Zach's blue-gray eyes studied her face with concern. "When do you rest?" "When I die, probably." Grace tried to make it sound like a joke, but it came out bitter instead. "What can I get you?" The stew tonight is actually quite good. Stew and a beer would be fine. Zach did not move immediately, though. Would it be forward of me to ask if you would mind if I sat at one of your tables? I promise I will be a model customer. Grace felt herself smile, a real smile for the first time in days. That would be fine. Table 6 in the corner has just opened up. Thank you. He headed toward the indicated table, and Grace turned to place his order with Liu. The Chinese cook raised one eyebrow at her. That man, he watches you. He is just being friendly. Liu ladled stew into a bowl. Friendly, is that what they call it now? Grace felt her cheeks warm. Do not start. I do not have time for whatever you are implying. Maybe you should make time. That one has honest eyes. Hard to find. Grace carried the stew and beer to Zach's table, determinedly ignoring Liu's knowing look. Zach thanked her courteously and began to eat, and Grace returned to her other duties. But she was aware of him throughout the evening, aware of his presence in a way that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. True to his word, he was a model customer, nursing his single beer slowly, eating his meal with evident appreciation, and watching the room with those alert, intelligent eyes. When a different drunk patron got too grabby with Grace around 10 o'clock, Zach did not even have to stand up. He simply fixed the man with a cold stare, and the drunk immediately released Grace's arm and mumbled an apology. It should have annoyed her that she needed defending, but instead Grace just felt grateful. She was too tired to fight all her battles alone. As the evening wore on and the crowd began to thin, Zach remained at his table, occasionally ordering coffee to justify his continued presence. Finally, near midnight when Grace was cleaning up, he approached the bar where she was tallying her tips. I was wondering if you might allow me to ride with you again, just to make sure you get home safe. Grace should have said no. She should have maintained her independence and her distance. But the truth was that the ride home was long and dark, and she was bone-tired, and the thought of Zachary Quinn's steady, reassuring presence was more appealing than she wanted to admit. All right, thank you. They rode out together into the cool October night. The temperature had dropped further over the past few days, and Grace shivered slightly in her thin shawl. Zach noticed immediately. You should have warmer clothes. Winter comes hard in Nevada. I know. It is on my list, somewhere between fixing the barn roof and buying winter feed for the animals. Grace heard the bitterness in her own voice and tried to soften it. I apologize. I am poor company tonight. You have nothing to apologize for. You are working yourself to death trying to hold onto your land. That is nothing to be ashamed of. They rode in silence for a while before Zach spoke again, his voice careful, as though he was weighing each word. Have you considered taking on a partner? Someone to help work the farm in exchange for a share of whatever profit it produces. Grace laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. What profit? The farm produces nothing right now. I have no seed to plant, no money for stock, no time to work the land. All I am doing is keeping the bank from taking it while I work myself into an early grave. That is not sustainable, Grace. The sound of her first name in his voice made her breath catch. I know it is not, but what choice do I have? If I give up even one of my jobs, I cannot make the mortgage payment. If I lose the farm, I have nothing. I will end up working in some factory back east or worse. At least this way I have hope, even if it is killing me. Zach was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. There might be another option, something that would solve both our problems. What do you mean? He pulled his horse to a stop, and Grace did the same, turning to look at him in the moonlight. His expression was serious, almost nervous, which seemed out of character for someone who carried himself with such confidence. I have been working at the Double R for 3 years now, saving every penny I could spare. I have enough money to buy seed, stock, and supplies for a working farm. What I do not have is land. You have land but no resources to work it and no time because you are killing yourself trying to earn enough to keep it. We need each other, Grace. I do not understand what you are proposing. Zach took a deep breath. Marry me. Not for love or romance, just as a practical partnership. We combine what we have. Your land, my savings. We work the farm together, make it productive again. You would not have to work 3 jobs anymore. You could focus on the farm, on building something real. And I would finally have land of my own again, something I have been dreaming about since I was 16 years old. Grace stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage, to a man she had known for less than a week. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of wild, impulsive decision that should be rejected immediately. But it was also, she realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach, the only viable solution she had heard in 8 months of desperate struggle. You do not even know me, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I know enough. I know you are a hard worker who does not quit. I know you are honest and proud and fiercely protective of what is yours. I know you deserve better than slowly dying from exhaustion while the bank circles like vultures. And I know that sometimes in life, you have to take chances if you want to survive. This is more than a chance. This is madness. Maybe. But is it any more mad than what you are doing now? Grace could not answer that. She sat on her tired horse in the middle of the Nevada darkness, looking at this man who had appeared in her life like something out of a dream, offering her exactly what she needed wrapped up in the most insane package imaginable. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. Zach nudged his horse forward again, and they resumed their ride toward her farm. I know it is a lot to ask, but I want you to know I am serious. This is not some kind of trick or scheme. I am offering a genuine partnership. We would work together, build something together. And if after a year or 2 you wanted to end the arrangement, we could figure something out. I would not trap you in a situation you hated. They reached the turnoff to her farm, and Grace paused, looking at the dark outline of her property in the distance. Why me? You could probably find land to buy somewhere if you saved a bit longer. Why propose this arrangement to someone you barely know? Zach met her eyes steadily. Because I have been watching you these past few days, and I see someone who reminds me of my mother. Someone with courage and determination, and a refusal to quit even when everything seems hopeless. I respect that, and because I think we could be good partners, Grace. I think we could make something real out of that struggling farm of yours, together. I need at least a few days to consider this. Take a week, take 2, I am not going anywhere. He touched his hat. You get some rest now. I will see you at the saloon on Tuesday, if not before. Grace watched him ride away into the darkness, then turned her mare toward home. Her mind was spinning, unable to settle on any coherent thought. Marriage. A partnership. Zachary Quinn with his honest eyes and his savings and his impossible proposal. It was insane. It might also be her only hope. The next few days passed in a blur of work and frantic internal debate. Grace found herself unable to think about anything except Zach's proposal. Every time she struggled with some impossible task on the farm, she imagined what it might be like to have help, to have a partner. Every time she dragged herself out of bed after too few hours of sleep, she thought about what it might mean to give up even one of her jobs. But marriage. Marriage to a stranger, of course. She had barely known Thomas when they married either. They had courted for 4 months before he proposed, and she had said yes, because he was kind and offered her a home and a future. She had grown to love him over time, had mourned him genuinely when he died. But their marriage had started as something practical too, a transaction between two lonely people who wanted to build something together. Was this really so different on Sunday, her one day without formal work obligations? Grace forced herself to truly assess the state of her farm. She walked every acre, noting everything that was wrong, everything that needed fixing, everything that was slowly falling apart from neglect. The list was overwhelming. Even if she quit all 3 jobs and devoted every waking hour to the farm, she could not fix it all alone. She simply did not have the strength or the skills or the resources. By the time she returned to the house, Grace's decision was half made, but she needed to know more about Zachary Quinn before she committed to anything. She needed to understand who he really was, what kind of man he was when no one was watching. On Monday morning, instead of going directly to the boarding house, Grace rode out to the Double R Ranch. She had never been there before, but she knew its location, and the ride took less than an hour. The ranch was impressive, a sprawling operation with several large barns, extensive corrals, and a main house that spoke of wealth and success. Grace felt suddenly self-conscious about her worn dress and shabby appearance, but she had come this far. She rode up to the main house and dismounted, tying her mare to the hitching post. Before she could knock, a man emerged from the house. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that suggested decades of outdoor work. "Can I help you, miss?" "I am looking for information about one of your ranch hands, Zachary Quinn. My name is Grace Zimmerman." The man's expression shifted to one of interest. "I am Robert Randolph. I own the Double R. You are asking about Zach. Is he in some kind of trouble?" "No, nothing like that. I just need to know what kind of man he is. It is important." Randolph studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Come inside. We will talk." He led her into a comfortable sitting room and offered her coffee, which Grace accepted gratefully. When they were both seated, Randolph leaned back in his chair and regarded her with shrewd eyes. "Zach Quinn is one of the best men I have ever had work for me. He is honest, hardworking, good with horses and cattle. He does not drink to excess, does not gamble, does not cause trouble. He keeps to himself mostly, but he is respected by the other hands. In 3 years, I have never had a single complaint about him. Why are you asking?" Grace chose her words carefully. "He has proposed a business arrangement that would require me to trust him completely. I need to know if that trust would be well placed." "What kind of business arrangement?" "I would rather not say if you do not mind. It is personal." Randolph was quiet for a moment, then chuckled. "He asked you to marry him, did not he? Offered to help you work your farm in exchange for a partnership." Grace felt her face flush. "How did you know?" "Because Zach has been talking about buying land for 3 years. He saves every penny, does not spend on anything unnecessary. And because he came in last week, asking for my advice about a widow woman who was working herself to death trying to hold onto her farm. I told him if he saw a way to help her and get himself some land in the process, he should take it." Sounds like he listened. "You told him to propose marriage to a stranger." "I told him that sometimes opportunities come in unexpected packages, and a man has to be brave enough to recognize them." Randolph set down his coffee cup. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I do not know you and I am not going to tell you what to do with your life, but I can tell you this. If you are looking for a partner you can trust, you will not find better than Zach Quinn. He is solid, dependable, and honorable. If he gave you his word on something, he will keep it or die trying. That is just who he is." Grace absorbed this, feeling the last of her resistance crumbling. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Randolph. You are welcome. And Mrs. Zimmerman, I hope you say yes. Zach deserves a chance at his own place, and from what he told me, You deserve a partner who can share the load. Seems like it could be good for both of you." Grace left the Double R with her mind made up. She rode directly to town, asking around until she found out where the ranch hands typically spent their Monday evenings. She was directed to a modest rooming house on the edge of Tonopah Junction, and she waited outside until she spotted Zach returning from some errand. He saw her immediately, and surprise crossed his face. "Grace, is everything all right? I have made my decision. Can we talk somewhere private?" Zach nodded quickly, leading her to a small porch behind the rooming house where they would not be overheard. He turned to face her, and Grace could see the tension in his shoulders, the nervousness in his eyes. He was afraid she was going to say no, she realized. This mattered to him as much as it did to her. "I went to the Double R this morning," Grace said without preamble. "I spoke to Mr. Randolph about you. I needed to know if you were who you claimed to be." "That was smart. What did he tell you? That you are honest, hardworking, and trustworthy, that if you gave your word on something, you would keep it." "He is right. I would." Grace took a deep breath. "Then yes, I will marry you. I accept your partnership proposal." Joy flashed across Zach's face, so intense and genuine that Grace felt her own heart lift in response. "You mean it. You are sure." "I am sure. I do not have any other options that make sense, and I believe you are sincere. So yes. We will do this." Zach stepped forward and took her hands in his. His grip was warm, calloused from work, steady. "I will not let you down, Grace. I promise you that. We will make your farm work. We will build something good." "Our farm," Grace corrected gently. "If we are going to be partners, it has to be ours, not mine. That is the only way this works." "Our farm," Zach agreed, and his smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "When should we do this? The marriage, I mean. Do you need time to prepare, or?" "As soon as possible. Every day we wait is another day. I am killing myself with 3 jobs. Can we find a preacher tomorrow? I will arrange everything. Tomorrow afternoon if I can manage it." Zach squeezed her hands. "Thank you for trusting me, Grace. I know it was not an easy decision. Thank you for offering me a lifeline." Grace felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "I need to go. I have to work at the boarding house in the morning, and I need to figure out how to tell Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Peterson that I am quitting 2 of my 3 jobs. Keep the saloon work if you want it. The extra money would not hurt, and it is only 3 nights a week. We can manage that." Grace nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I will see you tomorrow then." She rode home in a daze, unable to quite believe what she had just agreed to. In less than 24 hours, she would be married to Zachary Quinn, a man she had known for less than a week. It was insane. It was desperate. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. The next day passed in a frantic rush. Grace worked her morning shift at the boarding house, then told Mrs. Henderson that she was getting married and would need to quit. The older woman was surprised but offered her congratulations and a small bonus in honor of the occasion, which Grace accepted with gratitude. Mr. Peterson at the general store was similarly surprised and pleased, offering her a discount on any supplies she might need for setting up a household. Grace thanked him, gave her notice, and promised to stop by sometime to let him know how she was doing. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Grace met Zach in front of the small church at the center of Tonopah Junction. He was dressed in his best clothes, clean and freshly shaved, his dark hair combed back from his face. He looked handsome and nervous and earnest, and Grace felt a flutter of something that might have been anticipation. She had worn her best dress, which was not saying much, but she had washed and pressed it carefully and pinned up her dark blonde hair with the few good pins she owned. Zach looked at her like she was beautiful, which made Grace want to cry and smile at the same time. The preacher was a kind-faced man named Reverend Morrison, who had agreed to perform the ceremony on short notice. He seemed a bit surprised by the speed of the arrangement, but asked no uncomfortable questions. The ceremony itself was brief and simple, with two of Zach's friends from the ranch serving as witnesses. Grace spoke her vows in a steady voice, meaning every word even if the circumstances were unconventional. Zach's voice was deep and certain, his eyes never leaving hers. When Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Zach leaned down and kissed her gently, respectfully, just a brief touch of lips that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through Grace's entire body. They were married. For better or worse, for survival and partnership and a desperate gamble on the future, they were married. After the ceremony, Zach took her to a small restaurant for a modest celebration meal. Over plates of roast chicken and vegetables, they began the awkward work of figuring out how to be partners. "I want to be clear about expectations," Grace said, picking at her food. "I know this is a business arrangement, but we are married now, and people will have certain assumptions." "How do you want to handle that?" Zach was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I think we should be honest with each other always. That is the only way a partnership like this can work. As for the rest, we will figure it out as we go." "I am not expecting anything you are not willing to give, Grace. This marriage is whatever we decide it is, nothing more and nothing less." "That is fair." Grace felt some of her tension ease. "I appreciate your directness. I told you I would be honest with you, I meant it." Zach reached across the table and took her hand. "This is strange for both of us, but I believe we can make it work. We will start by saving your farm, our farm, and we will build from there." That evening, Zach loaded his few possessions onto a wagon he had borrowed from the ranch and drove out to the farm with Grace. It was strange, arriving at her home with a husband, stranger still to show him around the property that was now half his. Zach did not comment on the shabby state of things, though Grace saw him taking note of every repair that was needed, every failing system. He simply unloaded his belongings, which included a trunk of clothes, some tools, a rifle, and a surprising amount of cash in a locked box. 3 years of savings, he explained when Grace stared at the money. "About $300. It is enough to buy seeds, some young stock, supplies for repairs. If we are careful and smart about it, we can make the farm productive again within a year. $300. Grace had never seen so much money in one place. Combined with what she would continue to earn at the saloon, it might actually be enough to save them. That first night was awkward, as Grace supposed first nights in arranged marriages always were. She showed Zach the bedroom, then offered to sleep on the sofa in the main room. "Absolutely not," Zach said firmly. "This is your house. I will take the sofa. When I have time, I will finish building that addition your husband started, and I will have my own room. But for now, you keep the bedroom." Grace wanted to protest, but the truth was she was exhausted and the thought of her own bed was too appealing. "Thank you, that is kind of you. It is practical. You have been running yourself ragged. You need proper rest." Grace retreated to the bedroom, changed into her nightgown, and lay in her bed listening to the sounds of Zach moving around in the main room. It was strange having another person in the house after so many months of solitude. Strange, but not unpleasant. She fell asleep wondering what she had gotten herself into and hoping desperately that she had made the right choice. The next few weeks established the new rhythm of their partnership. Grace kept her job at the Silver Dollar, working Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday nights. The rest of her time was devoted to the farm, working alongside Zach to begin the monumental task of making the land productive again. Zach proved to be everything Robert Randolph had promised, and more. He worked from dawn to dusk without complaint, tackling the most difficult jobs with steady determination. He repaired the barn roof, fixed the fences, cleaned out the neglected animal pens, and began the process of turning over the fallow fields in preparation for spring planting. Grace worked beside him, matching his pace as best she could. Together they cleaned, repaired, and slowly began to restore order to the chaos. Zach used his savings carefully, buying 2 young pigs, a small flock of chickens, and a better milk cow to replace Grace's aging animal. He purchased seed for wheat, corn, and vegetables, and repaired the old plow that had been rusting in the barn. They worked as a team, falling into a natural division of labor. Zach handled the heavy physical work and anything requiring carpentry or mechanical skill. Grace managed the animals, the kitchen garden, and the household needs. They planned together, discussed decisions, and learned to communicate in the shorthand that develops between people who spend every day side by side. And slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Grace learned that Zach was an early riser who liked his coffee strong and his breakfast substantial. She learned that he was patient with animals, even tempered in the face of setbacks, and possessed of a dry sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments. She learned that he sang quietly to himself while he worked, old songs his mother had taught him, and that he had a habit of standing very still when he was thinking through a problem. Zach learned that Grace was fiercely independent and hated asking for help, even when she needed it. He learned that she was a surprisingly good cook when she had decent ingredients to work with, that she was clever at finding creative solutions to problems, and that she pushed herself too hard and had to be reminded to rest. He learned that she sometimes woke in the middle of the night crying from dreams she would not talk about, and that she carried her grief for Thomas quietly but deeply. They did not talk much about personal matters at first, both of them wary of overstepping boundaries. But gradually, as the days turned into weeks, they began to open up to each other in small ways. Zach told her about his family, about the ranch in Texas, and what it had meant to lose it. Grace told him about growing up in the orphanage, about the loneliness of never having a place to belong until Thomas gave her one. "That is why you are fighting so hard to keep this place," Zach said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It is not just the land. It is belonging somewhere." "Yes," Grace said softly, "exactly that. This is the first place that was ever truly mine. I cannot bear to lose it. You will not lose it. We will not lose it." Zach's voice was firm, certain. "I promise you that." The physical attraction that had hummed quietly between them from the beginning began to grow stronger as they spent more time together. Grace found herself noticing things about Zach that had nothing to do with his abilities as a farmer. The way his muscles moved under his shirt when he worked. The rare, devastating smile that transformed his serious face. The gentleness of his hands when he handled a newborn chick or touched her arm in passing. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not pushy or demanding, but undeniably interested. Wanting. And Grace realized with a mixture of surprise and unease that she was beginning to want him back. It was a strange situation. They were married but not intimate, partners but not truly husband and wife. Grace did not know how to navigate it, and Zach seemed equally uncertain. He never pushed, never made demands, never even hinted that he expected anything more than what they had agreed to. But the tension between them grew slowly, building like a storm on the horizon. One night in early December, about 6 weeks after their marriage, Grace came home from the saloon to find that Zach had finished the addition. He had been working on it in spare moments, using salvaged materials and his own considerable skill, and now it stood complete. A small second bedroom with a real bed, a window, and a door that closed. I told you I would finish it, Zach said, looking pleased with himself. Now you do not have to feel guilty about me sleeping on the sofa. It is wonderful, Grace said honestly. You did beautiful work. That night, for the first time since their marriage, they slept in separate rooms. Grace lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why she felt lonely instead of relieved. She could hear Zach moving around in the addition, settling in, and she had to resist the strange urge to go to him. This was what she wanted, she reminded herself. A partnership, not a romantic entanglement. They had an arrangement that worked. There was no reason to complicate things, but her heart, apparently, had not received that message. December brought the first real cold, and Grace was grateful for Zach's foresight in buying winter feed for the animals and firewood for the house. They worked on indoor projects during the worst weather, with Zach building furniture and Grace sewing and mending. The farm was beginning to look like a real operation again, organized and functional, ready for the spring planting season. Grace kept working at the Silver Dollar, and Zach often accompanied her to town and back, their evening rides together becoming a cherished routine. They talked more freely during those rides, the darkness and the privacy encouraging confidences. Grace found herself telling Zach things she had never told anyone, secret fears and hopes and dreams. And he shared his own stories, his own vulnerabilities, creating a growing intimacy that had nothing to do with physical touch and everything to do with trust. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged modest gifts. Grace had used some of her saloon tips to buy Zach a good pocket knife to replace his worn one. He had ordered fabric from the general store and paid Mrs. Henderson to sew Grace a new winter coat, warm and well-made, the kind of practical luxury Grace would never have bought for herself. She cried when she opened the package, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. Zach looked alarmed. "If you do not like it, I can." "I love it," Grace interrupted, wiping her eyes. "It is the kindest gift anyone has ever given me, thank you." They were sitting in front of the fire, and in the flickering light, Zach looked at her with such warmth that Grace felt her heart skip. "You deserve kindness, Grace. You deserve so much more than you have had. You have given me so much already. This farm would be gone without you. I would probably be dead from exhaustion. You saved me, Zach. We saved each other," he said quietly. "You gave me land and a purpose and a partnership I value more than you probably realize. This works, what we have. I am grateful for it." Grace moved closer to him on the sofa, acting on impulse. "I am grateful too." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire, and at some point Zach's arm came around her shoulders, and Grace let herself lean against him. It felt natural, right, like something they had been moving toward since the day they met. That night, when they retired to their separate rooms, Grace lay awake for a long time thinking about the man in the next room. Somewhere in the past 2 months, Zachary Quinn had stopped being just a business partner and had become something more, someone important. Someone she cared about in ways that had nothing to do with their arrangement. She was falling in love with her husband. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt like finally admitting something she had been denying for weeks. Grace had loved Thomas in a comfortable, practical way, but what she was beginning to feel for Zach was different, stronger, deeper, terrifying in its intensity. She had no idea if he felt the same way. He was kind to her, attentive, considerate. But was that love, or just the behavior of a good partner? Grace did not know, and she was afraid to ask. January brought bitter cold and the first serious challenge to their partnership. A winter storm hit hard, trapping them inside for 3 days with howling winds and heavy snow. They were prepared with supplies and firewood, but the close quarters and forced proximity created a new kind of tension. On the second day, tempers frayed slightly over some minor disagreement about rationing the firewood. Grace said something sharp. Zach responded defensively, and suddenly they were having their first real argument as a couple. "I am just trying to be practical," Zach said, his voice rising slightly. "And I am trying to make sure we do not freeze," Grace shot back. "We have plenty of wood. There is no reason to sit here shivering to save a few logs. It is not about this winter. It is about planning ahead, about making sure we have enough for the rest of the season. I know how to plan ahead. I survived alone for 8 months before you showed up." As soon as the words left her mouth, Grace regretted them. Zach's expression closed down, hurt flashing in his eyes before he shuddered it away. "You are right. You did survive alone. I apologize for overstepping." He stood up, his movements stiff. "I will go check on the animals." "Zach, wait." "I did not mean it like that." But he was already pulling on his coat and heading for the door. Grace sat alone by the fire, feeling miserable. The truth was she had been cold and tired and frustrated, and she had lashed out at the easiest target. It was not fair and it was not right, and she needed to apologize. When Zach came back 30 minutes later, covered in snow and clearly half frozen, Grace had hot coffee waiting for him. "I am sorry. What I said was unkind and untrue. I do not know what I would have done without you these past months. This farm would be gone and I would be worse than dead. You are not overstepping. You are being a good partner and I appreciate it. I was just cold and cranky and I took it out on you." Zach accepted the coffee and took a long drink, his eyes studying her over the rim of the cup. "I am sorry too. I was being controlling about something small. You are right that we have plenty of wood. I just worry sometimes that we are not prepared enough, that something will go wrong and it will be my fault. Nothing is going to go wrong that we cannot handle together." Grace moved closer to him. "That is the point of this partnership, right? We face things together." "Together," Zach agreed, and some of the tension eased from his shoulders. They made up the fire to a cheerful blaze and spent the evening playing cards and talking, the argument forgotten. But that night, lying in her bed, Grace thought about the fear she had seen in Zach's eyes when she said she had survived alone. He was afraid she did not need him, she realized. Afraid that their partnership was one-sided, that he was more invested than she was. She needed to tell him the truth. But the truth was that she had fallen in love with him, and she had no idea how to say that without risking the delicate balance they had achieved. February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures and the first hints of approaching spring. Zach began preparing the fields for planting, and Grace started seedlings in the kitchen, tiny green shoots that represented hope for the future. The farm was ready. They had made it through the worst of winter with their partnership intact and their resources carefully preserved. One evening in mid-February, Grace was working at the Silver Dollar when a well-dressed stranger came in asking questions about her. Grace heard about it from Liu, who looked worried. "This man, he asks about you, wants to know about your farm, your husband, your finances. I do not like it." Grace felt a cold knot form in her stomach. What did he look like? Fancy suit, cold eyes, like a banker or lawyer. A banker. Grace's heart sank. It had to be about the mortgage, but she had been making her payments, scraping together every penny. What could they possibly want? She found out the next morning when the same man appeared at her farm. He introduced himself as Charles Hendricks, representative of the First Bank of Nevada, and he had papers with him. Papers that showed the bank had sold her mortgage to a different institution, and the new holders were calling in the full loan immediately. "You cannot do that," Grace said, feeling panic rise in her throat. "I have been making my payments, every single one." The terms of your original loan included a clause allowing the holder to demand full payment at any time. The new bank has decided to exercise that clause. You have 30 days to pay the full balance of $400, or the property will be foreclosed. $400. An impossible sum. Grace felt the world tilting around her. Zach appeared from the barn, took one look at Grace's face, and immediately came to her side. "What is going on?" Grace explained with a trembling voice, and she watched as Zach's expression hardened into something dangerous. He turned to Hendricks, who seemed suddenly less confident. "This seems convenient timing, calling the loan now when we are about to plant and make the farm productive. Is someone trying to buy this land for cheap?" Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. "I just represent the bank, sir. I do not make the policies. Who bought the mortgage? Who is the new holder? I am not at liberty to say." Zach stepped closer to Hendricks, and there was something in his posture that made the banker take a step back. "You just told my wife she has 30 days to come up with $400 or lose everything. I think you can at least tell us who is behind it." Hendricks swallowed hard. The mortgage was purchased by a private investor, a Mr. Victor Sterling. He owns several properties in the area and has been buying up land. That is all I know. "Get off our property." Zach's voice was cold as ice. "And tell Sterling that if he wants this land, he will have to go through me first." Hendricks left quickly, nearly stumbling in his haste to get away. As soon as he was gone, Grace collapsed onto the porch steps, her legs unable to hold her. Zach sat beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "We will figure this out," he said firmly. "We are not losing this farm." "How?" Grace heard the despair in her own voice. "Even with all your savings, we used most of it on supplies and stock. We do not have $400. We are not even close." "Then we will find it. We will sell something, borrow from someone, figure out a way. Grace, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "I promised you we would save this farm, and I keep my promises. We are not giving up." Over the next week, they scrambled desperately to find the money. Zach went back to the Double R and asked for an advance on his savings, anything Randolph might have set aside. The ranch owner gave him $50, every spare penny he could afford. Grace sold her wedding ring from Thomas, the only piece of jewelry she owned, for $20. They sold one of the new pigs and most of the chickens. They borrowed from everyone they knew, small amounts from friends and acquaintances who could not afford much themselves. At the end of the week, they had $230. Nowhere near enough. Grace sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of money that represented everything they could scrape together, and felt defeat settling over her like a shroud. "It is not enough. We failed." Zach paced the kitchen, his frustration evident in every movement. "There has to be something else. Some other option." "There is not. We have sold everything we can spare, borrowed from everyone we know. There is nowhere else to turn." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I am going to lose it, Zach. After everything, I am going to lose it anyway." "No." Zach stopped pacing and came to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his. "No, we are not done fighting yet. I will find a way." "There is no way. It is over. Grace, listen to me." Zach's voice was intense, urgent. "This farm is not just yours anymore. It is ours. And I will be damned if I let some greedy speculator steal it from us. I will find the money. I swear it." But Grace could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear that mirrored her own. He did not know how to fix this any more than she did. That night, Grace lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. She could not sleep, could not rest, could barely breathe under the weight of impending loss. Around midnight, she heard movement from Zach's room, heard him pacing restlessly. She got up and went to his door, knocking softly. Zach, the door opened immediately. He was still fully dressed, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "Grace, are you all right?" "No, can I come in?" He stepped aside and Grace entered the small addition. It was neat and spare, containing only the bed, a chair, and a small table. Zach had built it to be functional rather than comfortable, a place to sleep and nothing more. "I cannot stop thinking," Grace said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I cannot imagine losing this place after we have worked so hard. We are not going to lose it." But Zach's voice lacked conviction. "You cannot promise that. We both know we are probably beaten." Zach was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and pulled Grace into his arms, holding her close. She stiffened in surprise, then melted against him, letting herself take comfort from his solid, steady presence. "I am sorry," Zach said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I promised you I would save this farm, and I am failing. You trusted me with your land, your future, and I am letting you down." Grace pulled back just enough to look up at him. "You have not let me down. You have given me months I would not have had otherwise. You have given me hope and partnership and more than I ever expected. If we lose, it is not your fault. It is just bad luck and greedy men. I cannot accept that. You deserve better. I have better. I have you." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond partnership or practical arrangements. Zach's eyes searched her face, and Grace saw her own feelings reflected back at her. "Want, need, love." "Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something. This has not been just a business arrangement for me, not for a long time. I care about you. I think I started caring about you from that first night in the saloon when I saw you working yourself to death with that stubborn courage. And over these months, caring has turned into something deeper. I love you, Grace. I am in love with you, and the thought of losing this farm, of seeing your heart break, is killing me." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for the first time in days they were not entirely tears of despair. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since you proposed this crazy arrangement, since you gave me hope when I had none left. You are the best man I have ever known, Zachary Quinn, and no matter what happens with the farm, I do not regret marrying you, not for a single second." Zach cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "We are going to figure this out. Somehow we will find a way." Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was desperate and passionate, and full of all the emotion they had been holding back for months. Grace kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring everything she felt into the connection between them. They stumbled toward the bed, still kissing, and fell onto it together. That night, for the first time since their marriage, they were truly husband and wife in every sense. They made love with desperate tenderness, finding comfort and connection in each other's arms, shutting out the uncertain future for a few precious hours. Afterward they lay tangled together, Grace's head on Zach's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "No matter what happens," Grace whispered, "I am glad I have you." "You will always have me," Zach promised. "Always." They fell asleep that way, holding each other against the darkness. The next morning they woke to pounding on the front door. Zach dressed quickly and went to answer it while Grace hurriedly made herself presentable. She emerged from the bedroom to find Robert Randolph standing in their kitchen, looking serious but not unfriendly. "Mr. Randolph," Zach said, surprised, "what brings you here? I heard about your situation with the bank. Word travels fast in a small community." Randolph set a leather satchel on the table. "I also did some asking around about this Victor Sterling character. He is a speculator from California who has been buying up failing farms and ranches, then reselling the land at a profit to mining companies and railroads. He is doing it through manipulating mortgages, calling in loans, forcing foreclosures. Your property is not the only one he is after. Grace felt sick. So there is nothing we can do. I did not say that. Randolph opened the satchel and pulled out a stack of bills. This is a loan, not a gift. $200, enough to make up what you are missing. You will pay me back when you can with reasonable interest. I figure if you can make this farm productive the way Zach has been planning, you will be able to manage it within a few years. Grace stared at the money, unable to speak. Zach found his voice first. Mr. Randolph, this is incredibly generous, but we cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. Zach, you have worked for me for 3 years. You are one of the best men I have ever known, and you deserve a chance at your own place. And Mrs. Quinn, from everything I have heard, you are a fighter who deserves to keep what is yours. I do not like seeing good people crushed by men like Sterling. So take the money, save your farm, and make something of it. That is the best thanks you can give me. Grace found herself crying again, but this time with relief and gratitude. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will pay you back, I promise. I know you will. Randolph smiled. Now you two better get that money to the bank before Sterling finds some other way to cause trouble. That afternoon, Grace and Zach rode into Tonopah Junction with $415, enough to pay the mortgage in full and cover the foreclosure fees. They walked into the bank together, and the look on Charles Hendrick's face when they counted out the full amount was almost worth the weeks of stress and fear. This pays the loan in full, Zach said coldly. And we want a receipt showing zero balance and clear title to the property transferred to Grace and Zachary Quinn jointly. Hendricks processed the payment with visible reluctance, and when they walked out of the bank with the clear title in hand, Grace felt like she could finally breathe again. They rode home in the fading afternoon light, not speaking, just enjoying the relief of crisis averted. When they reached the farm, their farm, Zach dismounted and then reached up to help Grace down. Instead of releasing her when her feet touched the ground, he pulled her into his arms. We did it, he said, his voice full of wonder. The farm is truly ours now, paid for, clear title ours. Ours, Grace agreed and kissed him in the golden light of approaching sunset. That night marked a turning point in their marriage. They did not return to separate bedrooms. Grace moved her things into Zach's room, and they shared a bed from that night forward, their partnership finally complete in every way. Spring came with a burst of activity. They planted the fields together, working from dawn to dusk to get the seed in the ground. Zach had planned carefully, choosing crops that would do well in Nevada soil and climate. They planted wheat, corn, and barley in the larger fields, and closer to the house, Grace established a kitchen garden with vegetables and herbs. The work was back-breaking, but Grace had never been happier. She still worked at the Silver Dollar 3 nights a week, and the extra income helped, but the farm was their real focus. They worked side by side every day, and in the evenings they would collapse together, exhausted but satisfied, planning and dreaming about the future. As spring turned to summer, their crops grew. The wheat came in particularly strong, and Zach's careful management of water and soil paid off in healthy, abundant growth. They added more animals, a few sheep and another milk cow, and the farm began to truly feel like a productive operation. The physical intimacy that had begun that desperate night before Randolph's loan had deepened into something profound and beautiful. Zach was a gentle, attentive lover who made Grace feel cherished and desired in ways she had never experienced. Their passion for each other was matched by genuine friendship and respect, creating a marriage that was everything Grace had never dared to hope for. In July, Grace realized her monthly courses were late. She waited a week to be sure, then another week because she was afraid to hope, before finally telling Zach one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I think I might be pregnant." Zach's reaction was immediate and joyful. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I am fairly certain." Grace leaned into his embrace. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it." Zach kissed the top of her head. "A baby, our baby." "Grace, you have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a farm, a real marriage, and now a family. I love you so much." "I love you too. I was so afraid when I first married you that I was making a terrible mistake, but it was the best decision I ever made." By August, Grace was certain about the pregnancy, and they began preparing for the baby's arrival in the spring. Zach built a cradle from cherry wood, spending his evenings sanding and polishing it to silky perfection. Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets, overwhelmed by how small everything was. The harvest came in strong that fall. They brought in the wheat and corn with the help of some hired hands, and when the final accounting was done, they had enough to pay all their debts, including the first installment on their loan to Randolph, and still have money left over to prepare for winter and buy supplies for the baby. Standing in their barn looking at the stored grain and provisions, Zach pulled Grace into his arms. "We did it. We made the farm work. We are going to be all right." "Better than all right," Grace said, placing his hand on her growing belly. "We are going to be happy." Winter passed more easily than the previous year. They had plenty of supplies, a warm home, and each other. Grace continued to work at the Silver Dollar through December, but after Christmas, she stopped because the pregnancy was making her too tired. Zach insisted she rest, taking over more of the household work himself while still managing the farm. On a cold night in late March 1886, Grace went into labor. Zach rode frantically into town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, who arrived just in time to help deliver a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Zachary Quinn, honoring both the man who had given Grace her first home and the man who had saved it. Zach held his son with tears streaming down his face, looking at Grace with such love and wonder that she felt her heart might burst. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you for giving me this family, Grace." "Thank you for giving me a life worth living," Grace replied, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Over the next few years, their life together continued to grow and flourish. The farm became increasingly productive, and they slowly expanded their operation. They paid off their loan to Randolph ahead of schedule, much to his pleased surprise. Grace returned to working occasional shifts at the Silver Dollar when she wanted extra income or just a change of pace, but the farm provided their primary living. In 1888, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a beautiful baby with her mother's dark blonde hair and her father's blue-gray eyes. Thomas was a devoted big brother, already showing signs of his father's patient, protective nature. Zach finished expanding the house, adding a proper second story with 3 bedrooms and a sitting room. The farm now boasted substantial herds and flocks, productive fields, and a reputation for quality produce and livestock. They had become one of the more successful small farms in the area, proof that hard work and partnership could overcome even desperate circumstances. One evening in the summer of 1889, 4 years after their hasty marriage, Grace and Zach sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Sarah to catch fireflies, their laughter floating on the warm air. "You ever regret it?" Zach asked quietly. "Marrying a stranger because you were desperate?" Grace turned to look at her husband, this man who had become the center of her world. "Not for 1 second. You gave me back my life, Zach. You gave me love and partnership and a family I never thought I would have. Marrying you was the bravest and best thing I ever did. I am the lucky one. I got land and a wife and a family, everything I had been dreaming about since I was 16 years old. And I got to fall in love with the most extraordinary woman I have ever known." Zach took her hand, squeezing gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Grace. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for seeing me that first night in the saloon and being brave enough to propose something crazy. Thank you for keeping your promises. Thank you for loving me." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink over their farm, their land, their home. The desperate widow and the determined cowboy had found each other in the hardest of times and had built something beautiful together. In the years that followed, they would face other challenges, other hardships. Droughts and storms, sick animals and crop failures, the normal struggles of farming life. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word, and their love only grew stronger with each passing year. They had 2 more children, another boy and another girl, filling their expanded house with laughter and chaos. Grace lived to see all 4 of her children grown and married, lived to hold grandchildren in her arms and tell them the story of how their grandfather had proposed marriage to a desperate widow, and together they had saved a failing farm. She never forgot those dark months when she had worked 3 jobs and slowly lost hope, never forgot the moment Zachary Quinn had looked at her with honest eyes and said, "Marry me, we will work it together." It had seemed like madness at the time, but it had turned out to be salvation. Grace and Zach grew old together on their farm, watching the land they had saved flourish and provide for their growing family. They celebrated anniversaries and births, mourned losses, and lived through the changes that came with the turn of the century. But through it all, they remained devoted to each other, best friends and passionate lovers, partners who had chosen each other in desperation and stayed together in love. When Grace finally passed away in 1923 at the age of 62, Zach held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me. You made my whole life worthwhile." And Grace, with her last breath, whispered back, "You saved me. In every way a person can be saved, you saved me. I love you, Zachary Quinn, always." Zach followed her 2 years later, and they were buried side by side on the farm they had fought so hard to keep. Their children and grandchildren continued to work the land, keeping the Quinn farm productive and successful, a testament to what 2 desperate people could build when they chose partnership over pride, love over fear, and together over alone. The story of the widow who worked 3 jobs and the cowboy who proposed marriage became family legend, passed down through generations. It was a story about courage and trust, about taking risks when everything seemed hopeless, about finding love in the most unexpected places. But most of all, it was a story about partnership, about 2 people who came together out of necessity and discovered that together they were stronger, braver, and more capable than either had ever been alone. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had built a legacy that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. The Quinn farm still stands today, though it has changed hands outside the family. But locals still tell the story of Grace and Zach, of the widow and the cowboy who made the impossible possible through sheer determination and unexpected love. It is a reminder that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards, and that partnership, real partnership built on trust and respect and love, can overcome almost any obstacle. Grace Zimmerman had been 24 years old, exhausted, and utterly alone when a tall cowboy with blue-gray eyes offered her a lifeline. She had been brave enough to take it, and that bravery had given her everything she ever wanted: a home that was truly hers, a partnership that honored her strength, a family that filled her days with joy, and a love that lasted until her final breath and beyond. That is the power of choosing to trust, of daring to hope even when hope seems foolish. That is the magic that happens when two people decide to work together rather than struggle alone. That is the legacy of Grace and Zachary Quinn, the widow and the cowboy whose arranged marriage became one of the great love stories of their time. Their story ended not with tragedy or loss, but with a quiet satisfaction, a life well lived, and the knowledge that they had chosen each other every single day, from that first desperate proposal to their final moments together. They had built something lasting out of dust and desperation, and that was the greatest achievement of all.